Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wild194. I hope you're doing well today. My mouth is still so sore from me about wisdom teeth taken out today. It's not horrible like it was earlier in the day. It's not as swollen as it was either. But I didn't think I'd be able to do any recording today. I have the day off today and tomorrow to try to just relax and recoup, have a good 4-day weekend. And I've just recently finished a book about a week ago. It really let me down, frankly. I was very bummed with this because of how great the first story in here was. I want to start off with a few things. First off, the cover on this book looks fantastic. A black hair press anthology is what this is. Lockdown Horror #1, edited by D. Kershaw, Maggie Pazzi, and S.N. Graves. That cover looks so cool, man. Seriously, that's a great looking cover, that monster design. I will say this. The first story in here, called let's see, what is it? Only Ever Night by L.P. Hernandez, who I know I've read in DOA 1 or 2, one of those books, those collections of horror extreme stuff. This author crafted such a great story. And I want to say this up front. L.P. Hernandez has some great talent. If it's the person I'm thinking of who's done some other stuff in DOA's 2 collections, Dead on Arrival, the person really has some talent here. I don't know if it's a he or a she. And I will say this, as I read the book more and more, read the other short stories out here. I'll tell you about L.P. Hernandez's story in a minute. But as I read other stories in here, I realized more and more that this whole book was compiled with a bunch of amateur people who have developed skills to an extent, and they have talent. They do have talent. Some of them have concept ideas that are just not taken out all the way like it needs to be. And they need work. They need work. It's really all it is. A lot of these authors, I want to let anybody out here know who happens to be compiled in here as an author. One of your short stories are in this book. Do not quit writing just because of this negative review of this book. Don't quit writing. I'm going to advise you on that because I got a copy of this for free on Kindle. I was listening to the free section one day when I happened to be looking, and I thought the cover looked excellent. And I'm glad I read the book. It wasn't a complete loss. For the most part, it was. It's about, let's see, 260 pages long, and the pages fly by. Some of these stories in here are like a page long. I saw one that was like half a page. You know, it's ridiculous, frankly. Why be in an anthology and do like a page-long story? But there's quite a few people in here who did that. I don't know how many stories there was off the top of my head in this entire book, but there was quite a few that I was like, why would you do this to yourself? Like, put so many out here. Anyway, the first story in here, Only Ever Night by H.P. Hernandez, is it H.P. or L.P.? Anyway, it doesn't matter. That story is fantastic. It's like a 50-page long story, and it's phenomenal. It has so much heart to it. It's scary. This looming darkness about it really got me involved, and it just stuck with me. Every time I talk about this book or try to record this review for the book, I think about that story. It's the one that brings me back to wanting to have this book in my collection on my Kindle. So essentially, there is a bunch of folks who wake up one morning in their house, and it's still dark outside. But it's like the afternoon. Like the sun should be up by now. It's like 12 p.m. And they can't figure out what's up with that. And they start kind of walking around their house, trying to figure out what the deal is with the sun not being out and whatnot. At one point, I think they go out to town first, something like that. They start talking to people. Seems like everybody's in the kind of same mindset of not understanding what happens. Before they actually go out in town, they actually go, the mother, I believe, in the family, there's a brother and a sister and the mom and dad. Mom goes on the fridge, pulls out an egg, and you know how the egg has the shell around it? Well, this thing only has half the shell, but it's like, it looks like the shell is all around this thing, but it only has half of the egg there. And as she's holding it, it shrinks down to a non-existence. It just disappears. It doesn't exist anymore. And things around this world, and as soon as they go downtown, let me try that again. As soon as they go downtown, and they start talking to people in the neighborhood and stuff, everybody else is saying the same thing. They actually see one guy whose arms vanish off of his body. Yeah. It's a cool concept, man. A really cool concept that really holds weight here. And it's great. It's genuinely a great story. I love it. The ending is emotionally satisfying. It's effective. But when you read the rest of this book, you cannot help but feel completely let down with how all of the other stories in here, except for one other one that I'll talk about in a minute, the rest of them in here are really just they have no contest about what you'd have as the best story in here. And no wonder it's the first thing you read in the book. And it's a good thing that's in there, because if somebody else picked up this book and read one of the other stories first, they probably wouldn't go and work their way through this book and get to that really good story from JP or LP Hernandez, whatever the name is. Forgive me, Hernandez. There is one other story in here I did like, though. That one being my favorite I just talked about. But there is another story in here that I liked a whole lot about a particular guy. And something about getting headaches, I believe is what happened. It was something like that. But that was a good one, too. I don't know who wrote it. I'm not going to look it up. I don't care enough to look it up. But that author who did that one, that was a good story, too. I really thought the ending was pretty cool. It's like the guy saw like a meteorite fall out of the sky or something. It was probably one of the first 4 or 5 stories on this entire book. I think it was. But it was a great story. Really enjoyed that. He was sick, headaches, so on and so on. Got hungry, was doing all kinds of weird stuff. But that story and that first story I talked about, Only Ever Night, completely stuck with me, and everything else in here, dude, is completely forgettable. I mean, just completely forgettable. There's either no depth whatsoever, there's no effort to make depth, there's no real concept. Some of it can just be cutesy, talky type stuff. It just seems like a lot of writers in here do not have that skill developed. They haven't had enough practice. These stories they have no business being published. It's not that they're not edited or anything, or that there's a lot of grammatical errors or anything like that. I saw a couple, I think, from what I remember, unless it was the Brian Keene book I'm confusing with that I just reviewed. But even so, pretty sure it was this book. It feels very amateurish for the most part. And I don't mean that as an insult. When you're an amateur, you're learning. We're all learning constantly, so technically we're all amateurs if you want to be honest, but skills develop over time. You need to practice more and grow from there. And I'll tell you, most of these writers in here have some kind of talent. I pretty much think all of them have some kind of talent where they could try to go somewhere, but some of these stories, man, they just feel completely weak. I mean, completely weak. There's not even that many redeeming ones. They're not even good filler ones. You know, when you love Goosebumps like how I do, for example, Goosebumps has the big titles like Night of the Living Dummy, Haunted Mask, Welcome to Dead House, all that big stuff that starts up something. Then you have filler books in between the great books, you know what I mean? And this is a great example of a book that the filler stories don't even do well at their own job of being a filler. They can't be silly, they're not really funny or anything like that. I think there was one in here that got a grin out of me one time, and that was about it. And I flew through the book pretty fast in a couple of settings. It didn't take a long time to read. But the fact is, a lot of these stories in here are rough, and they shouldn't be in here. It was a rough read, and it seems like a lot of people on Goodreads agree with me on this too, who also happened to download this when it was free to download. That's really all I have to say about this book. I'm trying not to be completely mean about it. I know there's more of these, Horror Lockdown or whatever, Horror number 1, Horror number 2, something like that. But the fact that the title says Lockdown Horror right there, I assumed that we were doing nothing but stories involving people being locked in their house for the COVID lockdown type of thing. Not specifically dressed around COVID, but maybe a zombie apocalypse story or something like that. That's not what happened here. What we actually got was stories about anything. It could be fairies, it could be zombies outside of your house, it could be serial killer stuff, it could be an abused woman who's accepted that she's going to be abused in a basement. I think it was like the second story in the whole book. It just... I don't know. It's a rough one. It's a really rough one. I hate to put it like that too, but it is. Anyway, I don't think the other books have anything to do with lockdown. So I'm not going to probably pick them up unless they're free to pick up too, and I already picked them up. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to pick up any more because this was a big letdown. Shouldn't have been as bad as it was. Again, the 2 stories that were in here that I talked about that were so good, props to you guys. The rest of you folks out there who are writing and submitting to have your story in here, trust me, you have talent. It's just, you need to work on it. You need to work on your short storytelling. I do believe there's writers out there, and I talked about this in my Brian Keene review, I do believe there's different writers out here who are better at short stories over novels, and better at novels over short stories. I think that's a very possible concept with people out there. I think many writers are that type of person. A lot of the time the problem is that their writers go for the money, and they go for something that they're not really meant to go for. They can't really handle the fullness of a novel, or the shortness of a short story. So that could be you. Think about it, guys. I mean, it's very possible that could be you. I'm not trying to bash anybody, but this is a bad book. Really bad book. There's like 2 stories in here that are worth reading, and everything else is rough. Real rough. Really undersold, really underdeveloped, I want to say. I know we're talking about a 260-page book, but when you have short stories that are like a page long, I mean, that's not development, man. Not that I want a ton of bloat, but still. Anyway, when it comes to Lockdown Horror #1, sorry guys, I hate to give it a bad review, but it ain't great. It ain't even good for most of the time. If I had to rate this book on a 5-star basis, I'd give it like a 2 out of 5 stars. I feel like I wasted a lot of time on this. Makes me want to not read books sometimes when I do have situations like that. It ain't great. It ain't great, and that's kind of sad. But what are your thoughts on this book? Have you read Lockdown Horror #1? What did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What did you think about it? I'd love to hear all that down in the comment section down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know all that down below, folks. Anyway, thank you for watching. God bless you, and goodbye.